Hey there, good afternoon. It is Monday, March 31st, and I am Rob, that developer dad. And we've been working on C Sharp and .NET and Blazor on my product. The DM is familiar for the past several months. And with the exception of a little bit of CSS cleanup and a little bit of minor refactoring and so on and so forth, I think the NPC generator is where I want it to be. So it's time for me to move on to the next set of features that I've been planning to add to this thing since day one, and that's an encounter tracker. Now, if you're a dungeon master and you run a lot of D&D games, you'll know that tracking the initiative order of combat encounters and so on and so forth can really become a chore, and you're having to flip back and forth through the monster manual and making notes. And if you're somewhat organized, you're making a spreadsheet, but or a Word document or whatever to keep track of the individual encounters. But man, that's a lot of work. And I want to come up with a way of making that a little bit smoother when I'm at the table running a game and I have these encounters. And I also want to see if I can come up with a way to make the process of planning these encounters and having them sort of ready in advance. That currently takes hours and hours out of my week before a game session to get those encounters put together so that in case they happen, I can just go right into them. All the information is there, that kind of thing. And it I I know that I can build some custom software to make that a whole lot easier on me during my planning stage, and then also easier when I'm actually running the game session. So it's gonna involve some new data types that we have to design. It's going to require some new storage stuff put in. There's going to be a whole lot of C Sharp and .NET coming up later on, but today and maybe tomorrow, I want to focus on really kind of digging in and figuring out all the bits and pieces that we're going to need to build in order to enable this encounter planning and tracking. So we're going to start off where I like to start when I'm doing all this stuff, and that's just in a blank PowerPoint presentation. It's as good a way for me to keep track of this stuff as any. And slide one, of course, is next feature. And let's go ahead and just encounter tracking. All right. So what do we need when we're tracking an encounter? What do we need to run an encounter? The basic information about the player characters, hit points, armor class, passive perception, passive insight, maybe, and list of conditions that may be applied to a player character, list of temporary conditions that may be applied to a player character that affect the encounter. We also need basic information about the monsters. hit points, armor class, initiative, order, passive perception, temporary conditions, as well as, I think for, definitely need those. It would be massively helpful to have a summary of each critter's combat abilities and traits that might affect how the player's actions affect each bad guy. That's going to be a sub point. So that gives us a pretty good idea of what we do and don't need in and when we're running an encounter. Now, what might an encounter runner look like? Now, let's duplicate the slide. And this is not going to be a pixel perfect rep of what I think it'll look like, but it'll probably look something like, well, first I got to delete that. And I'll just drop a rectangle here, and we'll knock the fill on this off to this pale peach. And I think what we'll have is a rectangle here. And another rectangle right here. And these colors aren't carved in stone or anything like that. But encounter name. And let's just pop that in here. Current turn number. Combat round number. Current turn. Combatant name. Oh, excuse me. And game time elapsed. Maybe. So I'm just going to surround these with brackets like that. Whoops. Just to let me know that those are We'll use handlebar brackets for these, just to let me know that these are like displayable fields. And I'm going to pop that font size down just a scooch to get everything up on one script, on one line. We'll left justify it. And then, of course, in here, we'll do one of these. And I'm going to do a shape fill on this of just white. Text. Oh, I got to do a text fill of black. And character name. Hit points. And status. Yeah. And we'll shrink this text out a little bit. Just a scooch. And we'll left justify that. And I'll just go boop, 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 boop. Two, three, four, five. Just like that. And then over here in this big empty space, give me a shape. Where are my shapes? Here they are. Current character info panel. For player characters, gives DM a place to update hit points and status, conditions, etc. For bad guys, update hit points, status, conditions, summary of abilities and traits. Maybe. Probably. Okay. And then finally on this big panel here, I need, come here, a button. And I gotta change the shape on this to, let's say this, copy, paste, change the fill to that, hold action, and we'll just turn that text black, and turn, and we'll turn it black. And of course, hold action, it just kind of bumps them out of the initiative order. until the player speaks up, and then I can go, all right, yep, we'll go back to you. End turn, moves initiative to the next person. So I'm going to grab this, and we're going to duplicate it. End turn, advances to the next character in the initiative order. Hold action, temporarily suspends the character's turn. Voluntarily. Character's turn, and moves them to the end of this initiative round. Excuse me. At the beginning of the next turn, their original position is restored. Party list items will be color coded one way. Enemy enemy list items and party plus ally list items will be color coded for ease of viewing. Each turn will reorder the initiative list showing the current turn at the top. When a character's hit points reach 0, their tag, their list card is grayed out. And their turn is skipped automatically. All right. Now, I'm not going to be building a ton of automation in here. The only thing I want to automate is whose turn is it? Everything else is going to be up to the dungeon master and the players. The players are going to roll their own dice and tell the DM what they rolled. The DM is going to roll his own dice. I might just put a little dice roller on here for convenience sake for the DM to use. But for the most part, I might allow, or I might have the ability to say, okay, well, this player is targeting this enemy. This enemy is targeting this player, that kind of thing, just so that we can keep track of that stuff. But I'm not going to be automating attack rolls or saving throws or anything like that. I want to leave that up to the actual people playing the game. This is just purely the paperwork and record keeping and organization for running the encounter to help the DM run it more smoothly. So to track an encounter, we have to build the encounter. To track an encounter, we have to build an encounter. And if you give a moose a muffin, So we also need a way to easily access encounters while we're at the table. So we need to be able to organize these encounters into sessions. Now, we may not get to every encounter in a session. So what we really need to do, we may not use all encounters attached to a session within that session. Maybe instead of attaching encounters to a session, we attach them to a story chapter, we can then link encounters from a story chapter to a given session, either in advance of the session or during that session. Story chapters are just organized plot sections of an overall story that the DM and players are co-creating. So we're starting to get into talk about the different, it's time to talk about the different entities that we're thinking about here. Different entities are in play here. For building and running a campaign or adventures. So our story happens within the context of a world. Now I got to change the color on this to, let's go to a very light blue. And I got to change the text to black on there. Change the color on this to slightly darker blue. Change the text. Story happens within the context of our game world. And we'll push that up to the top. And then that story is broken into chapters. And we'll pick an even lighter blue yet. And we'll stick with the black. Chapters adventures. Whoops. And then finally, those chapters and adventures, just in terms of encounter tracking. Have encounters. So that's how we build up the world, and we kind of organize our game into story with chapters, with encounters, so on and so forth. And of course, there's places and the NPCs. Not all of the encounters are kill the monster, grab the treasure. Some of the encounters are role playing. Some of the encounters might be traps or other challenges, that kind of thing. I'm primarily concerned with the combat encounters with this feature that I want to enable here. So there's this. And then there's the actual game. We're going to call that the campaign. Now, a dungeon master might run several campaigns in the same game world, but they might not necessarily want the things that players in this group do within the game world to affect what happens in another group of players' trip through that game world. So for now, we're just going to have a copy of. So what I got to do is I got to put another shape in here. And I'm going to call it I'm going to go from this dark blue to this lighter blue. World instance. And we'll push this off to the right and up to the top. And I'm going to say world and story instance. And within this world and story instance, we don't have necessarily chapters and adventures, but we have sessions. So I'm going to grab this guy, pull it over here, and we're going to change the color on that to this medium blue. Sessions. And we're going to send that text black. Bounce it off here, up to the top. And then, of course, we have our encounters. I'm just going to do a copy and paste of this guy. Now, in addition to these sessions, I'm going to need to shrink this over here. We also have player characters. And I'm going to send this text to black. Oh, come on. I'm going to make this text black as well. So we've got player characters, and we might have notes. For now, notes by the DM to himself. Now our campaign. If I'm thinking about this, the world and story instance is encapsulated by the campaign. Encounters, we want to act on copies of these encounters so that the DM doesn't have to revert them to what they were before, if they want to run the same encounter with a different group, so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's notes that are attached. Over here, I think I want to call this, instead of just encounters, encounter plans. And then when an encounter gets brought into a session, it becomes an encounter and is run as such. But the plan is just the data. I'm going to bump that over to the right. Consists of the data required to run an encounter with a set of players. And we'll bold that up. Owned by DM user. Owned by DM user. And of course, this structure gives us all kinds of room to play with, or all kinds of room to play in eventually, because once these things are fleshed out, I could perhaps give a DM the ability to attach NPCs that they create to a game world. Or perhaps within the story, occurs in a location. And then the game world would have locations. And NPCs could be attached to locations, like towns. They could be attached to points of interest within those towns. And all of that stuff. I'm not going to build that out yet. I'm not quite sure how I want it to look, but I at least want data structures set up now so that I can add that flexibility later as I more properly conceptualize it. So when a DM is preparing for a session, and they're just starting out with this, the very first thing they're going to do is they're going to create a new game world. And then they're going to create a story. And the story represents the entire arc of the whole campaign that they intend to tell with this group of players. So the story refers to the narrative aspect of the campaign that's being run. Chapters and adventures, also known as modules, one-shots, etc., etc. And then within here, we've got the encounter plans. Sessions. Typically, a chapter will be multi-session. Many to one on chapter. Let's just scooch that down here. And I'll drop breakpoint in here. And we'll just lower the font size there. Encounters, many to one per chapter. All right. And then, of course, there's notes for each session. New slide. What is an encounter plan? List of adversaries. What is an encounter plan? Okay. Refers specifically to combat encounters. Has a list of adversaries. Each individual enemy combatant. Each individual adversary. I'm going to keep going with the adversary language. Adversary is a member of this list. Is linked to a particular chapter or adventure within the overarching story. And that's really it. May contain notes about consequences of the encounter, i.e., treasure or other rewards for party success, bad things that happen if the party fails. May include notes. Includes notes about the location of the encounter. And right now, those are just going to be plain text notes. I'm not going to do anything fancy with that. It's just going to be, this encounter happens in such and such a room on the map, under the map key 2, or the map room keyed as map room 2, or whatever. Because we're not doing mapping yet. We may never. We'll see what happens. But we're going to include some notes about the location of the encounter. Includes notes about special conditions present around and during the encounter. Things like hazards, traps, lava, quicksand, things like that, things that could mess with anybody participating in the combat, really. Hazards, countdown to something awful, etc. May have a time limit. In terms of game time. Like the party might have 5 minutes before this encounters allies, hear the fight, get to where the fight's happening. Things like that. For specifically combat encounters, list of adversaries, and this is the thing that I'm most interested in. These parts right here. And finally, is attached to a play session for use in a tracked encounter. Is copied into a play session for use in a tracked encounter. New slide. The encounter manager accepts party information and an encounter plan. Handles, excuse me, updates to the encounter participants data, handles turn order, keeps track of timing as rounds and minutes. Each round is 6 seconds, 10 rounds to a minute. Every initiative user moves within that 6 seconds. Six-second round. Every initiative user acts fully within that 6-second round. This allows, hey, C Films, this allows us to accurately keep track of temporary status conditions on any combatant that may receive them. I am planning out the next set of features, or the next major feature that I'm going to be adding to the DM's familiar. This is just me taking notes of what I need to build in order to implement encounter tracking. And in order to track an encounter, I need a way for the dungeon masters to build their encounters. Encounter manager. We also need a new slide. World manager. Handles the data access and other logic that may be added later that's required for a DM to create a game world in which their campaigns will occur. Allows management of story, stories contain chapters and adventures. Chapters and adventures have encounters. New slide. Campaign manager allows management of a specific group of player characters interacting with a story in the DM's game world. Handles tracking of encounters, notes, story sections that have been told, plot points that have yet to be experienced, etc. Oh, CSS is woof, dude. I love CSS. It is I really, really enjoy working with it most of the time. And then every so often you'll get into doing some stuff that's just brutal. Tracking of encounters, notes, story sections that have been told. Nice. Well done. Yeah. So we've got a few managers here. We've got the encounter manager, which we'll probably get to last. We've got our world manager, which handles the DM's planning. For planning and prep. Stories contain chapters and adventures, chapters and have encounters. The encounter builder is a facet of world management. We've got our campaign manager. It's just setting up new which are just quite literally a group of player characters interacting with a story in the game world. Handles all of this stuff. And then, of course, at playtime, session management, planning prep, for game management, for session running. All right, I think I've got the use case roughly mapped out at a really high level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this a productive stream. And tomorrow when we come back, we're going to start thinking about how these concepts fit together into an actual software architecture. And these concepts are going to fit into an actual software architecture in a very, very, very familiar looking static structure. If you've been following along with the way I build software for, as long as I've been doing these streams. But what might surprise you is I may not have an actual class named the Encounter Manager. I may not have an actual class named a World Manager or a Campaign Manager. Or if I do, they'll be very, very thin, tiny little classes that inherit from, say, game data manager base class that gives me the basic list, load, save, zap, that kind of thing. We'll see when we get there. That gets more into the detailed design. Excuse me. Now, we had a pretty good requirements capture session. I've got some rough ideas of how these objects relate with each other. I've got a rough idea of what a running encounter might look like in the UI. Rough draft. And we've got the basic idea of what we want this thing to do. So tomorrow, I'm going to be thinking about these higher level concepts, how they're alike, how they're different, what are the common points, what are the points of divergence from one thing to the next. And then we're going to start thinking about what the code artifacts might look like and how might those code artifacts be organized within the wider system that is the DM's familiar. So until then, I thank you for joining me and hanging out, and take care of yourselves. Happy coding. Bye now.